今日咧2022年嘅3月1號，俄羅斯已經入侵咗烏克蘭好幾日啦。咁相信大家都從新聞唔同嘅渠道對呢件事有相當嘅了解，亦都有各種嘅情緒。咁我哋今日咧睇下 The Economist 點樣去分析呢件事。呢個咧就唔係最新一期嚟嘅，最新一期咧仲係未運到嚟香港。咁我呢啲就唔係訂戶啦，亦都唔係網上嘅訂戶啦，咁我就落街咧揾到一本實體版咧，就係1個月前嘅1月尾至2月頭，但係咧都係相當好嘅分析。咁當時就唔知道局勢會點啦，後來演變成咁，亦都出乎好多人嘅意料啦。我就覺得冇更好嘅 title 啦 ，Russia's roulette 俄羅斯輪盤啊，真係到底係實彈啊，定係空包啊？瞄準緊呢個烏克蘭，咁就其實都講咗好幾期㗎啦。The Economist 好多期都係呢個俄羅斯或者係普京做呢個封面，咁最後呢，事情嘅走向呢，亦都係我哋密切留意啦。咁我哋睇下呢個1個月前嘅分析 ，Russia's roulette。A war in Ukraine would have terrible consequences, especially for Russia. 咁今日呢條片呢，我會全篇文讀一次，每讀完一次英文呢，我就會用中文翻譯 ，OK， 然後到最尾呢，我會揀少少嘅 sentence pattern 呢，同各位同學去分享。Seldom in the field of human conflict did so much hang on the whims of one man. Is Vladimir Putin about to invade Ukraine, as the massing Russian troops on his border suggest? Or is he bluffing to extort concessions from his neighbor and the West? No one can be sure of Mr. Putin's intentions. Even his own foreign minister seems to be kept guessing. But if fighting is about to break out, the world needs to understand the stakes. 好少可呢，喺人類衝突嘅世界裏面呢，我哋係咁看重於一個人嘅心血來潮啊！到底普京佢係咪將要入侵烏克蘭呢？正如嗰啲集結於邊界嘅俄羅斯軍隊所暗示咁樣呢？定係佢純粹係虛張聲勢，去嘗試從佢嘅鄰居即係烏克蘭同埋呢個西方世界度去攞着數呢？冇人係知道普京諗緊乜，就算佢個外長都係蒙在鼓裏嘅。但係如果真係開戰的話呢，全世界都要知道個注碼個風險係乜嘢。Perhaps Mr. Putin is planning a full-scale invasion, with Russian forces thrusting deep into Ukraine to seize the capital Kiev and overthrow the government. Or he may seek to annex more territory in eastern Ukraine, carving out a corridor linking Russia with Crimea, the Ukrainian peninsula Mr. Putin grabbed in 2014. Then again, he may want a small war in which Russia saves Kremlin-backed separatists in Donbass, an eastern region of Ukraine, from supposed Ukrainian atrocities, and at the same time degrades Ukraine's armed forces. 或者普京計劃緊一場全面嘅入侵，由呢個俄羅斯嘅軍方呢深入烏克蘭去奪取首都基輔，推翻政府。又或者呢，佢係想吞併更多嘅東烏克蘭嘅領土，去挖出一條嘅走廊，貫通烏克蘭，連接俄羅斯同克里米亞，即係普京喺2014年掠翻嚟嘅呢個烏克蘭半島。但係呢，佢有可能想要一場小型戰爭，就係由俄羅斯呢去拯救頓巴斯，即係烏克蘭東部嘅呢個頓巴斯地區一啲呢據稱supposed 受到烏克蘭暴行所威脅嘅克里姆林宮所支持嘅分離主義分子，我哋要所謂拯救佢哋出嚟啊！佢哋所謂受到烏克蘭嘅威脅，同時呢場戰爭呢將會削弱烏克蘭嘅武裝力量、軍事力量。Because Mr. Putin has the initiative, it is easy to conclude that he has the advantage. In fact, he faces perilous choices. A big war entails extraordinary risks. But a smaller war that limits these risks may fail to halt Ukraine's westward drift. And if a small war does not bring the capitulation of a government in Kiev, Mr. Putin may inevitably be drawn into a larger one. 正因為普京佢採取主動呢，我哋好容易就會覺得佢係有優勢。事實上呢，佢面臨住一啲咧好危險嘅選擇。一場仗打得大的話呢，將會有極大嘅危險啊！但係打得細的話呢，去限制等啲危機唔好咁大啦。咁但係呢，又未必阻止得到烏克蘭向西方傾斜靠攏嘅噃。咁之但係呢，如果打一場小仗又冇辦法推翻基輔嘅烏克蘭政府呢，咁啊普京呢就焗住呢要捲入一場更大嘅戰爭。A full Russian invasion would be Europe's biggest war since the 1940s, and the first toppling since then of a democratically elected European government by a foreign invader. Russians would not only suffer casualties, especially during a long-running insurgency, but also cause the death of untold Ukrainians, fellow Slavs, with whom many have family ties. 一場全面嘅俄羅斯入侵呢，將會係自1940年代以嚟呢歐洲最大型嘅戰爭，亦都係首次呢有一個民選嘅歐洲政府俾一個外來嘅入侵者推翻。俄羅斯人呢會面臨住傷亡，尤其是呢面對住一個長期持久嘅民間嘅起義半反抗。並且呢亦都會導致呢極多數嘅烏克蘭人嘅死亡。烏克蘭人呢其實同俄羅斯人呢同屬呢個斯拉夫血統民族，咁佢哋嘅血緣親屬呢係遍佈各地。Russia would also suffer heavy sanctions. Its banks would be harshly penalized and its economy deprived of crucial American high-tech components. The ultra-rich, including possibly Mr. Putin himself, might be prevented from spending and saving abroad. Ordinary Russians would suffer from lower living standards, which have already been falling over the past 7 years. 俄羅斯呢會面臨住沉重嘅制裁，銀行呢將會受到嚴厲嘅懲罰，而個經濟呢將會冇辦法再獲得一啲重要嘅美國高科技配件。嗰啲巨富呢，可能包括普京本人呢，就會冇辦法呢再喺海外度使錢儲錢。普通嘅俄羅斯百姓呢，就要過一個更惡劣嘅生活水平。呢個生活水平呢，過去7年呢，都已經一直咁下跌㗎啦。And the subjugation of Ukraine would come at a strategic cost to Russia. Every country in the shadow would revise its security calculations. NATO would reinforce the defenses of its eastern members. Sweden and Finland might join the alliance. 烏克蘭淪陷呢，將要俄羅斯付上一個戰略嘅代價。每一個活喺俄羅斯陰影下嘅國家呢，都會重新去修訂佢哋嘅國防計算。北約呢會加強佢嘅東邊嘅成員國嘅國防。而瑞典同芬蘭呢可能會加入呢個聯盟。For Mr. Putin, the economic consequences of war would be survivable, at least in the short term. His central bank has $600 billion in reserves, more than enough to weather sanctions. But the political gains in Ukraine could easily be overwhelmed by setbacks at home, which, as Mr. Putin knows better than anyone, is where his fate will ultimately be determined. 對普京本人嚟講呢，呢啲經濟後果其實都捱得過嘅，至少短期而言係真嘅。佢嘅中央銀行有成6000億儲備，係絕對足夠去捱過呢個制裁。咁但係呢，喺烏克蘭嘅政治獲利呢，就好容易呢，就俾佢家鄉即係俄羅斯遇到嘅挫折所抵消。而普京本人呢，係比任何人都更加清楚，俄羅斯呢先至係佢命運最終決定成與敗 嘅地方，唔係海外嘅征戰，唔係烏克蘭，都係要回歸俄羅斯本土去決定佢嘅命運。Perhaps then it would start with a less ambitious invasion. However, a limited war could claim many lives and be hard to contain. Sanctions might be lighter, but they will still be painful. Russia's decoupling from the West will still accelerate. Moreover, if the government in Kiev remained independent, it would only redouble its efforts to join the West. Mr. Putin's thuggery over the past 8 years means that even Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine no longer hanker for closer ties with Moscow. 因此咧，可能普京咧會先開始打一場冇咁具野心嘅入侵先嘅，規模細啲先啦。但係咧，一場小戰爭咧都可以係殺害好多條人命，又甚至好容易係一發不可收拾，好難撳得住嘅。制裁因此可能會輕啲，但係都係令人痛苦嘅。俄羅斯咧只會加速同西方世界嘅脫鈎，並且咧，如果基輔嘅烏克蘭政府一旦仍然係維持獨立咧，咁咧只會加快去加入西方嘅進程。普京過去8年所做嘅陰濕嘢咧，係意味住咧好多嘅就算係東烏克蘭講俄語嘅人士咧，都唔再渴望同莫斯科咧靠得太近。The coming weeks will determine how Mr. Putin chooses, and nobody should doubt the stakes. Europe faces the prospect of Russia throttling the flow of piped gas. Even in the absence of a cutoff, it was expected to spend $1 trillion on energy in 2022, twice as much as in 2019. War would affect the prices of other commodities too. Oil is already spiking. Russia is the world's largest exporter of wheat, with Ukraine close behind. Russia is a big source of metals. In today's tight markets, even a small short could send commodity prices upwards. 未來數星期咧就會知道普京佢會點樣揀，而冇人咧係可以質疑其中嘅風險嘅。歐洲咧面對住一個情況就係俄羅斯咧有可能會係去壓緊呢個俄羅斯個天然氣運輸管道，等呢個歐洲咧冇燃料使用。就算咧冇 cut off， 即係就算仍然用俄羅斯比較平價嘅天然氣咧，歐洲咧都預期2022年要花費呢個1萬億嘅美金喺能源方面，已經比2019年高咗成1倍。可想而知，冇買俄羅斯天然氣咧，咁歐洲要使幾多嘅錢？咁呢個對歐洲都幾傷㗎噃。咁戰爭咧，亦都會係影響其他貨物嘅價格。油價已經升到叭叭聲㗎啦。俄羅斯咧，亦都係世界最大嘅小麥嘅出產地，烏克蘭緊隨其後。俄羅斯咧，亦都係金屬嘅一個重要出產地喎。喺今時今日咧咁緊張嘅市場，一個小小嘅震盪咧，都會令到物價係上升。A successful invasion of Ukraine would also set a destabilizing political precedent. The global order has long been buttressed by the norm that countries do not withdraw other countries' borders by force of arms. When Iraq seized Kuwait in 1990, an international coalition led by America kicked it out. Mr. Putin, who has a nuclear arsenal at his command, has already got away with annexing Crimea. If he seizes a bigger slice of Ukraine, it is hard to see him suddenly concluding that the time has come to make peace with NATO. 如果烏克蘭係成功被入侵的話咧，咁就會製造一個政治先例，咁就會對世界秩序構成一個動盪啦。國際秩序咧，不嬲都係跟隨一個江湖老規矩，就係咧國家咧係唔可以用武力去幫其他國家去劃界嘅。正如咧呢個嘅伊拉克去1999年去掠奪科威特嘅時候咧， 咁啊，美國就牽頭帶領一個國際嘅聯盟咧，就踢咗伊拉克走。普京佢手上有一個嘅核武啦，佢就已經係吞併咗克里米亞，而有拍囉柚全身而退嘅。假如佢今次喺烏克蘭度咧，再奪取一塊更大片嘅土地，我哋就好難會覺得佢有一日忽然間覺得夠鐘啦，我要同北約修好翻關係先，呢個咧就更加係幻想啦。More likely he will push on, helped by the newly established presence of Russian troops in Belarus to probe NATO's Collective Security Pact, under which an attack on one member is an attack on all. Not only would he relish the chance to hollow out America's commitments to Europe, but he has also come to rely on demonizing an enemy abroad to justify his harsh rule at home. 更大機會發生嘅係咧，係普京佢會再下一城，變本加厲，憑藉住咧佢哋喺白羅斯所培植嘅俄羅斯軍隊咧，會進一步咁測試呢個北約嘅呢個所謂嘅集體防衛條約。咁啊，集體防衛條約就話啦，一個國家受到攻擊，即係全體國家都受到攻擊。咁普京咧亦都好樂意去試水溫，努力咧每次有機會咧都會盡量去挖空美國對歐洲嘅承諾。佢亦都咧好中意咧係去抹黑一個嘅敵人，妖魔化一個敵國海外勢力咧，從而去合理化佢喺呢個俄羅斯本土所做嘅一個高壓、強硬嘅一個嘅管治啦。Other potential aggressors would take note too. The likelihood of China invading Taiwan will surely rise. The regimes in Iran and Syria would conclude they are freer to use violence with impunity. If might is right, more of the world's disputed borders would be fought over. 其他嘅準侵略者咧，都喺度抄緊筆記個波。咁中國進佔呢個台灣嘅機會咧，就大大提升。而伊朗同埋敍利亞嘅政權咧，都可能會得出結論，就係咧佢哋更加可以肆無忌憚、冇任何後果咁樣使用暴力。假如咧力量就是正確，誰大誰惡誰正確的話咧，世界咧更加多有主權爭議嘅呢啲嘅邊界咧，就會係打餐懵噶啦。With so much at risk, the West should respond in three ways: deter, keep talking, and prepare. To deter Mr. Putin, Western powers, especially Germany, should stop equivocating, present a united front, and make clear that they are willing to pay the price for imposing sanctions on Russia and also to support those Ukrainians who are ready to resist in the occupying army. Meanwhile, diplomats should keep talking, looking for common ground on, say, arms control and pressing for a face-saving climb down that Mr. Putin and his captive media would be free to spin however they wish. And Europe should prepare for the next crisis by making clear that its energy transition will cut its dependence on Russian gas by using storage, diversification, and nuclear power. 面對住咁多不穩定因素咧，西方社會係要以3種方式回應嘅：阻嚇、繼續談判、做好準備。要阻嚇普京咧，西方國家尤其是係德國咧，應該停止再喺度模棱兩可。佢哋要展現出一個好團結嘅陣線，表明佢哋係願意為着制裁俄羅斯而付出代價。亦都要支持嗰啲肯留低抵抗入侵軍隊嘅烏克蘭人。同時咧，外交官要繼續談判，要去尋求一個共識，例如係關於呢個軍事管制嘅共識，並且咧尋求一個咧落台階，係俾普京佢本人咧係挽回一個面子，等佢同佢個官媒咧係任佢哋吹水，任佢哋用佢哋嘅語言藝術將件事講成點都得，冇所謂。 而歐洲呢係要準備面對住下一次嘅危機，佢哋要表明呢，佢哋已經係準備好個能源過渡，就唔會再咁依賴俄羅斯嘅天然氣，因為呢，佢哋可以用佢哋嘅儲備啦、能源多元化或者核能嘅。Seldom has the difference between a country's interests and those of its leaders been so stark. Russia would benefit from better, closer, peaceful relations with the West. Such ties would be available if Mr. Putin didn't behave so abominably. Only he benefits from discord, since he can tell Russians they are under siege and need a strong man to defend them. But even the wildest strong man can miscalculate. Invading Ukraine could ultimately prove Mr. Putin's undoing. If it turns into a bloody quagmire or makes Russians poorer, angrier, and more eager for change, even if just for his own sake, he should claim a victory over the imaginary threat Russia confronts in Ukraine and back down. 好少可呢會有一個國家嘅利益同個國家元首嘅利益係相差咁大嘅。俄羅斯呢，如果可以同西方有一個更好、更親近、更和平嘅關係呢，俄羅斯係會受惠嘅。咁如果假如阿普京佢唔係咁乞人憎，佢做啲嘢唔係咁壞嘅時候呢，呢種嘅關係呢係有機會實現嘅。咁啊，只有普京本人呢，可以喺呢個不和同埋動盪之中係獲利，只有咁呢，佢先可以同俄羅斯人講呢，我哋國家呢受到圍困啦，你哋需要一個強人領袖呢去保護你哋。咁但係呢，最老奸巨猾嘅強人呢，都有誤判嘅時候啊！入侵烏克蘭呢，隨時將會成為阿普京嘅一失足成千古恨。假如局勢係演變成一個血腥嘅泥濘，又或者令到俄羅斯人更窮、更憤怒、更渴望轉變，咁啊就當為着阿普京本人着想都好啦，唔該佢嗱臨話自己已經勝利，話自己喺呢一場想像出嚟嘅烏克蘭威脅俄羅斯呢個大龍鳳事件之中宣佈自己獲勝，然後好收手撤兵啦。睇下啲 sentence patterns 啦，首先係倒裝句，認唔認得佢啊？學嚟做乜呢？開頭結尾用呢就最好啊，或者開段用都係最 sharp 嘅。Seldom in the field of human conflict did so much hang on the whims of one man 咧，好少喺某個領域咧會咁嘅。OK，seldom in a place did or do or does so much 咁。Perhaps 可能係咁嘅。嗱，成篇文流長，有好多解釋。有好多嘅理論，咁我哋唔好太強硬，我哋會謙虛啲，可能係 A， 可能係 B， 可能係 C， 咁亦都顯示出呢一個科學理性務實。Because Mr. Putin has the initiative, it is easy to conclude that。正因為佢好似好主動，我哋就覺得佢好似好有把握，胸有成竹咁嘅款。Because 乜。It is easy to conclude that 我哋好容易下一個結論覺得係咁。OK 呢句 A full Russian invasion would be Europe's biggest war since the 1940s. And the first toppling 原來呢一個全面嘅入侵將會係1940年代以嚟最大嘅戰役。呢個咪新聞價值咯。The biggest 啊 ，the first 啊 ，since 啊，80年內最勁嘅。咁啊，大家未出世係咪？咁所以咧，新聞價值就喺呢度啦。用呢啲 superlative 嘅 adjective。For Mr. Putin 啦 ，for 某個持份者啦，咁。At least in the short term 係咪用埋 at least 啦？咁啊，多一層頭盔 ，OK， 亦都更加 sophisticated。嗱，再嚟一次 perhaps then，OK。咁又點啊？咁樣咧，佢有可能咁樣嗱，好似畫鬼腳咁樣，好多分支。如果佢做咗 A， 咁有機會係 A1、A2、A3。如果佢做咗 A2， 可能係 A2.1、A2.2 咁樣。咁所以咧 ，perhaps then 咧咁簡單，都係一個開頭嚟噶。 跟住 The coming weeks will determine how Mr. Putin chooses。我哋英文會咁寫係嘛？時間做 subject， 中文一定唔會。OK， 中文會話咩啊？未來幾個星期咧，我哋就會知道佢會點揀啦。我哋會俾翻人佢啊，我哋係嘛？但係英文唔係嘅啊，時間做 subject。OK， 同樣啦，一個死物，一個 noun， 一個 nominalized 嘅 idea 做一個 subject。一個成功嘅入侵咧，就會設下一個先例。OK， 中文又唔會咁寫嘅嚇，好西化嘅。A noun would set a precedent， 埋下創下一個先例。咁啊，再嚟一次倒裝句啦。嗱，全篇文用咗兩次，一次開頭，一次結尾，冇第三次啦。咁啊，同埋一個呼應嚟嘅喎，都係 seldom 係咪 ？Seldom in the field, seldom has the difference。咁好少可一個國家嘅利益同國家元首嘅利益可以差天共地嘅，好少有，好罕見嘅。咁呢個咪係趣味所在咯，咪係新聞價值咯呢句嘢。最後結尾呢句啦，咁啊為着佢自己着想都好啦，唔該好收手啦。呢句嘢都我覺得可以萬能嘅喎，你諗下每篇文章總有正反立場，總有敵人，總有朋友。呢句嘢係勸你啲敵人啊，見好就收啦，唔好再泥足深陷啦。OK， 咁所以咧 ，even just for his or her or their own sake, he or she or they should 破折號 and back down。